The last characteristic we need to add to our shader is reflectivity. And also I want to show you how to change the color. But first, for reflections, we're going to use a shader glossy BSDF. And we're going to mix it over top of our translucent glass mixture. But first, let's look at the reflections in our reference image. Note that they're actually not that shiny. This doesn't seem to be a polished crystal, but more of a natural crystal. And so the reflections are a little more dull. In this case, of course, if you had a polished gem, you would want the reflections to be sharper. But in this case, we're going to use a higher value. So let's look at the glossy BSDF by itself. And the default value of 2 isn't that bad. I might bump it down to like 0.1 just so that it's a little more shiny. But in general, that does look pretty good. So let's duplicate this mixed shader node. And we will set the glossy to be in the second slot. And a mixed value of 0.5 I know is going to be too high. So let's go to 0.1. And our preview window down here is starting to be a little sluggish. We've got refractions and caustics, reflections, all happening, and so it's not going to be very snappy, but we might get away with it for some things. But I also am going to start rendering images for us to flip back and forth between. So first, let's do a render of pre-reflections. And then we'll jump to slot 2 and do a render with the reflections. So this is before, and this is after. Before reflections, after reflections, and this is doing something very important because remember, before this new reflection component, even though the bump map is super strong, way too strong than makes sense as an illusion for the surface, it still technically is only affecting the surface. And so the actual shape of the geometry is mostly hidden, and it's hard to see the simplicity of the crystal shape. And so by adding another reflection component, we see the simplicity, and also that serves to make the previous layer of bump that's really extreme, it helps to establish the illusion that that is happening inside of the material. And so again, we'll look at the after and before. With the after, we see the facets start to light up, reflecting the light that's coming from our environment map. And again, that's a very important part of this gemstone puzzle. And even though my reflection is completely uniform across the surface, we're still getting some of the speckle effect as it's being mixed with the shader underneath. And so I could add a texture to break up the roughness value or break up the amount of reflection, but I'm actually liking the effect as is. And so I'll just leave it simple for now and switch to slot 3 in case we do any other changes. But for this particular example, a glossy by itself is going to work fine, even though it doesn't have Fresnel and even though there's nothing affecting the color or the roughness. But by all means, I would encourage you to add those elements and tweak them as you see fit. Now, for the color of our gemstone, right now it's just, we've been working with white values, and it actually looks like ice, or at least fairly close to ice. But what if we want like a ruby, for example? Well, again, I'm going to use our absorption value to get that color information. So let's Shift-Control-D to duplicate our color ramp so that it maintains the input from our absorption. And here, if I plug this into, let's say, another glass node, let's just duplicate that for the sake of demonstration and plug in the color to that glass BSDF. Let's look at that. So we have black in the middle and then white on the outside, or rather black represents less see-through, white represents pure see-through. So in here we can change the flags. It's as simple as that. And let's go to the red direction. Let's say a nice bright red. Maybe bring the value down a little bit. And then the white flag will bring out a little closer to the edge so that we see that gradient from inside where it's thicker and the color is more saturated to the outside where it's less so. And this looks pretty cool. But it's not really a ruby because a ruby has a little bit of that effect, but not nearly this much. So let's change. Well, let's drag the the lower flag down. We'll make it a little bit darker, and then add another flag in the middle, and we'll make that the really saturated version. Okay, so we'll bring that up so that there's a little bit less white. There we go. That's looking pretty cool. And so from here, we can plug this into both the translucent and our glass BSDF. And let's see what that final result looks like. Okay, that's pretty neat. Although, I don't know, there's a little bit too much white in the translucent. It's kind of ruining the effect that I was going for, though it looks pretty cool, and this is certainly applicable to other gems, but maybe not for a ruby. So maybe I'll unplug it from translucent and just copy that red color in there instead. Now that looks pretty good. Maybe dial down the saturation just a bit, like 0.8. Just a touch. But that looks pretty neat. Kind of reminds me of a red rupee from Zelda, though a lot of things remind me of Zelda. All right, let's do a final render to see what this looks like. There we go. I think that looks pretty cool. I'm happy with that ruby shader. So I'm going to do one more example involving the colors, and I'm just going to name this ruby, and then we'll duplicate it, make it a fake user first, and duplicate it. And now this one will be called amethyst. And what I'm going to try to achieve is this look where there's purple almost in the upper corners of each crystal, and then it fades to white. So I'm going to try and achieve that real quick. Let's switch to slot number 4 and escape back to the node editor. And what I'm going to do is source some information from the texture coordinate node. And if I add after that, let's see, I think it's a converter separate XYZ. All right, let's see what that gives us. We'll take let's try object vector and look at the X, Y, and then the Z. Okay, yeah, so the Z is what I want. I'm going to add a converter color ramp after that and just exaggerate the contrast a bit. Okay, something like that. Now, you might be able to guess that what I'm trying to do, see, maybe tweak that just a little bit more. So what I'm going to use this for is the white value will represent the purple color, and then the black value will represent the white color. And so we won't be using this color ramp approach, using the absorption. Or, well, let me undo that. We actually might do a combination, but I'm going to try it just with this by itself. And so let's just change the flags to be those respective colors. Might as well color pick that deep purple there. And then the black one will change to white. Okay, very cool. Let's also apply this material to the others. And that's not, doesn't seem to be giving us what I expected. Maybe I need to use the world coordinates, or not the world, but the generated coordinates. Let's try that. Yikes. Okay, that's more like it. Let's increase the saturation of the purple. There we go, that looks like it. And we'll plug it into, let's first try both the translucent and the glass. See what that does for us. Yeah, it's pretty convincing. Let's look through our camera. Perhaps the purple's a little too dark. Let's bump that up. And also it's a little too prominent. So I might need to add another flag. Let's make this dark, like almost a black. There we go, that's pretty close. I wonder if I could bump up the strength of the bump map, of the first bump map. That's gonna help. It's gonna, by bumping up the strength of that refractive bump, it's going to give us some darker spots like we see up here. Cool. So that's an example of how you can create a gradient style coloration as well as a more uniform color from the ruby. So I hope you've been able to learn from this in a way that you can apply it to your own projects. And I would love to see you guys submit your own images of your shaders. So please do that on the course page. Thanks for watching.